I think by sore spot, I mean more like the kind of thought experiments along the lines of what people were struggling with in the early days of quantum mechanics. Schrödinger's cat, that kind of thing. That was a beautiful thought experiment. Like you have a sort of superposition of atom is decayed and atom is not decayed. And if you had the atom in complete isolation, you could maintain that superposition, but you have a Geiger counter there, and the Geiger counter is going to count when the atom has decayed. That's coupling the system to a macroscopic, the small system to a big system. And at that point, from our modern point of view, we would say decoherence happens. The environment bounces off this Geiger counter. It'll know if a click happened or not. That affects how air molecules move. And in an instant, if you aren't keeping track of all the air molecules and all the photons and everything in the world, you will no longer have a superposition of atom decayed and undecayed. You'll just have certain probabilities for both possibilities. And so then when you bring the cat into the picture, in the Schrödinger's cat experiment, the decay of the atom is supposed to trigger the death of the cat by some obscure mechanism. If people had known about decoherence, the cat wouldn't have added anything interesting to this picture. The cat is just part of this microscopic world. It will immediately decohere. It'll either be dead or alive. Whether or not I open the box and look at the cat is completely irrelevant. But people got themselves tangled up in knots over how important it is that a conscious observer opens the box and sees if the cat is alive or dead. So I feel like that was a good thought experiment. And that was what I mean by a sore spot. But it's, we really did surprisingly poorly. Normally when you discover a new theory, like Einstein discovered special relativity, Einstein discovered general relativity, the first thing you do is you understand how to recover what, your previous description of nature in the regime where that was valid. So just, Newtonian space-time, Newtonian gravity. That was a great theory, explained to pretty good approximation how the planets move and how the apple falls. So you got to be able to get that back out. That's why we don't just get to make random stuff up. It has to be consistent. And people had no trouble, deriving this. It's just a bunch of formulas. You just, take the right approximation. Things aren't, too massive or too fast moving, and out comes your old theory plus tiny, tiny corrections that you say, yeah, of course, yeah, we haven't ever measured anything precisely enough to see that. So everything makes sense. With quantum mechanics, we totally failed to do that. We totally failed to understand how what we perceive as reality in the sort of classical world emerges from this new theory. And I think the sort of wrong turn that was taken in response to this Schrödinger cat type thought experiment is a good illustration of that. We got tangled up with like the meaning of consciousness instead of just doing a calculation. The calculation in this case is what happens when your closed quantum system becomes an open quantum system, when there are parts of the world that have interacted with your system that you're not keeping track of. And underestimating how important that is, how important even the interaction of a single elementary particle with your system can be for its description. And I think today even now that we understand decoherence, I guess I have a favorite sort of litmus test for like how much pain can you tolerate. That goes like this. So it's basically, I was later told a version of something called Wigner's friend. But I like to think of it in terms of a spider that has surrounded the galaxy with an impenetrable spider web.
Okay.
Don't ask. Don't ask.
It makes me think of holography.
But gravity is not going to be important for this story. So, but you're right. We could bring that into. But the point is just the following. The galaxy is very big. So it's 100,000 light years across or something. So it takes 100,000 years for anything to even get, like if I shine a flashlight into into empty space out there at night, it's going to take 100,000 years for those light particles to leave the galaxy. Okay. And similarly, if I do a Schrödinger's cat experiment here, it's going to take 100,000 years for whatever the particles are that got entangled with the cat to leave the galaxy. Okay. But let's go back to sort of minimalist version of this experiment where, I have the chair here plus there, and there's just one particle that bounced off it or not. It was coming down towards this version of the chair, so it bounces off this version, but it doesn't bounce off that half of my wave function or state. And so if I forget about the particle, I get to this probabilistic distribution of like chair here, 50% chance, chair there, 50% chance, chair here plus there, 0% chance. I break up the coherent superposition. Okay. Now, in that story, if it's just one particle that did it, I could imagine changing the story. I could imagine saying, hey, I could catch up with this particle. How about I bring another reflector somewhere that just reverses this whole effect and makes the particle go back up to the ceiling. And now I've restored the superposition of chair here plus there, and the particles again just up at the ceiling. I've undone this interaction. It's very easy, right? If I have a particle, just one particle that moved from here to there, I can very easily make it go back again, right? What's hard to do is if there's all the particles in the atmosphere of this room that have bounced off the chair, there's no way I can try to undo this and revert to the original state. And so this is exactly, this is why we say it's an emergent phenomenon. There's nothing truly fundamental about it. It's just a practical issue, right? Now, what I just told you is actually not because of me, but it's very profound, right? It tells you that this idea that we've measured where the chair is and that the chair has gone from being in a superposition of here plus there to like being either here or there, that's not 100% objective. It's not like something that's, unchangeable. In the example with one particle, I could easily revert it or simply keep track of the particle all along and just have a superposition of chairs and particles. It's only when I forget the particle that the definite outcome will be there in some sense. And now I could add another particle and another and another, and clearly it gets more and more difficult to keep track of them all or to catch them and make them go back to where they started out. But it's a sliding scale. It's not like, there's no, when I add the 17th particle, now it's completely irreversible. No, it got a little bit harder again. And when I have the whole atmosphere, well, it just got insanely hard because there's like 10 to the 23 particles here. And so it's like exponentially hard. So why did I revisit this? Well, now I want you to think of the spider that has surrounded the galaxy. And in that spider's viewpoint, the whole galaxy is just one big quantum system. And it absolutely includes all the particles that have bounced off the dead and alive cat and that have made it either dead or alive from our point of view because we haven't kept track of those particles. The spider says, I have a quantum state. I can think of it in terms of decomposing it into a history where there's a dead cat and everybody's crying and there's an alive cat and everybody's happy. And that's one way I can choose to break up the state. It's sort of like when you have a vector that points this way, you can choose to say it's the sum of these two vectors. You choose a basis. To us, this basis is very fundamental because it's sort of picked out by the locality of interactions, the fact that things interact with each other at specific places. That's why air molecules bounce off a cat. But for the spider, this is all the same. It's just one big thing where nothing has really happened. And that's like, I would say that's definitely a sore spot. You have to acknowledge that the theory tells you that the description of the world by a super observer who has somehow isolated the whole galaxy and is has an understanding of its whole quantum state, is totally different and seemingly naively in contradiction with the description of the world by people in the galaxy who are subsystems of the galaxy, don't keep track of everything that's going on, who will say this happened or that happened. And so now your job is to take this and see if you can arrive at an actual contradiction rather than just a discomfort. People are going crazy over the fact that there's length contraction in special relativity, and some observers will say the car is shorter when it's going faster and so on. And that turns out to just not be any contradiction at all. As far as I know, this doesn't either. But a lot of people I know are extremely uncomfortable with it. I kind of embrace it. I love the fact that that the world is crazy enough to do this. So, for example, you could ask, can the spider and us argue about this? And the answer is no. The spider would have to make a hole in the spider web, and in order to talk to us at that point, basically information will escape from the galaxy. We share a common environment. This is why we all agree on what happened. You could also ask, why don't some of us end up thinking the cat died and some of us end up thinking the cat's alive? It's a calculation. You can just calculate that there is a probability for the cat dying and everybody being sad and there being an obituary in the newspaper and all of those correlated things that happen when the cat dies. And there is a probability for the cat is alive and everybody's celebrating and next year it has kittens. And there is, and you can calculate it, zero probability or really unbelievably exponentially small probability for cat died, everybody's celebrating. It's a calculation. It's not something we just make up. And so it explains something. But this calculation is based on the fact that we all share what I called an environment. By environment, I mean the stuff we don't follow, the stuff we don't know about. It's not important exactly what that stuff is, just that there's enough of it and that it's all interacted with the systems we care about. This is because there is such an abundance, an overabundance of things we don't know at the sort of quantum level. Quantum information is somehow very precise and delicate, and we know almost none of it. This is why it's so hard to build a quantum computer. Even when you try, it's really hard to hold it together. The spider knows, in my fantasy, knows all of it. Of course, totally impractical. You can't build such a good spider web. The galaxy would radiate. Like, how would you even insulate it that well? In practice, not really possible. But we can imagine, slowly extrapolating out to that situation from lab setups where we can arrange this sort of thing. Just put more and more in the lab until you have conscious objects in the lab that do experiments on each other and have cats and so on. And it's just what the theory tells us. The theory tells us we're going to have a specific history with some probability this will happen, with some probability that will happen. And for the spider, it's all just one sum, and it never breaks up into pieces. I'm very comfortable with that, but I think it's a sort of, I think a lot of the struggles people get themselves into with interpreting quantum mechanics, modifying quantum mechanics, and so on, are based on sore spots like that they somehow cannot tolerate.